name is Sonia Kapoor, and I'm a trustee and a co-founder of Seniors in Seva. As some of you may be aware, Seniors in Seva was started about 1.5 years ago by 5 of our batchmates from IRMA, the Institute of Rural Management, Anand. Our aim was to create a platform connecting senior professionals interested in pro bono consulting with organizations that have a social mission. We wanted to leverage their talent to help these organizations in their capacity building and in helping them make their operations more professional. We are really pleased to say that in the first year of our setup, we have already got 72 volunteers and 15 organizations that have registered with us. Our biggest win has been our partnership with NAFPO, National Association for Farmers, Producers, Organizations, where we are placing independent directors from our volunteer community onto the boards of 30 fledgling farmer organizations. And many of these farmer organizations are run by women. So that's really exciting. So this master class that we started was another initiative that we decided to launch because we felt that we have so much of talent and expertise available. Let's make it available to a wider audience more frequently. So every quarter, we invite a speaker from our volunteer database or experts like Ashoke Ji to share a new idea, a best practice that would be relevant both for the development sector and for the corporate sector. Our topic today, Design for Development, is a very exciting one. Our aim is to start a discussion around unconventional approaches to problem solving and innovation, particularly in the development sector. When we talk about design, it's not just about a creative effort. It is a way of thinking about a problem. It is a process. Sure, Sir Ashok Ji will take us through this process through a very exciting project that he was involved in called the Jawaja project. I will not talk much about it. I will let him do the talking on that. But I do wanted to say a few words to Ashok Ji. Ashok Ji, thank you so much for giving your time to us. Ashok Ji, as we know, is a very eminent thought leader in the space of design, has served NID for 25 years as Executive Director, Professor of Management and Communication, and a Distinguished Fellow. He has also been an Honorary President of the Crafts Council of India for 20 years and continues to be associated with them. He has received many recognitions, including the very prestigious Sir Misha Black Award for Design. So now I'm going to hand over to Ashok Ji. For about 30 minutes, he's going to talk about his project and his thinking and his ideas. And after his talk, we will open the forum for question and answers, which will be handled by my colleague, C.V. Gauri. So you can also write your questions in the chat box. And to ensure a smooth session, we will be putting everyone on mute during the time that Ashok Ji will be speaking. So over to you now, Ashok Ji.
Thank you very much, Tony Ji, and to Seniors for Seva for this opportunity. Let me start by hoping I'm not going to disappoint you, because it's not really going to be a master class in design for development. That would take much more time than necessary, even to explain the process of design. But I will be sharing an experience, one experience, and hopefully from that, the process of design as a problem-solving methodology will emerge, and perhaps some thoughts and ideas which we can take up in the Q&A. So what is left out of this presentation is probably even more important than what is here. But hopefully there will be enough in this to interest you. And there will be some opportunities, if you're interested, to take this further and to delve into this issue of design for development, not just at Jawaja, but in a broader way. So one of the issues, if we can have the slides now, please. One of the issues to keep in mind as you listen to this lecture is the problem of the language that we use. Next. Of course, the key question here is, what do we mean by design, and who is the designer? So I put certain phrases here which Each one of them could take a long time to explain, but this is generally what we're trying to talk about. And what is important as we see this, the next piece, is that if we take the quality of our everyday environment and the ethos of teamwork as critical to the design process, I think we will then have entered in this space effectively, because it is all about working together and learning from each other and learning from other disciplines. Now, there's a problem here, which I should indicate, because this is important to the experiment that you'll be hearing about. India and the subcontinent at large has possibly the longest unbroken history of design in the world. It starts, if you like, from Mohenjo-daro, and it ends, if anything can end at all, with, say, the Sea Link Bridge in Bombay today. But it's an unbroken history over thousands of years. And yet we don't have any word in any of our languages that quite describes design as it is today, as a profession and as a pedagogy. There is one word, perhaps, that we can and should use, which is color. But really what we're talking about today is design as a legacy and as a bridge between tradition and modernity. And as we do that, we're going to look at an experiment which has now been ongoing for over 50 years, where two institutions, the Indian Institute of Management and the National Institute of Design, decided in 1975-76, at a time when the late Professor Ravi Matthai had just stepped down from being the director of IINA and setting up this now world-famous School of Management Education. And NID had just emerged from a very serious crisis, which had almost led to closing down what was the first experiment in the developing world of design education. And the purpose of this journey to Jawaja was to test the relevance of these new disciplines that had come into India as part of its hope for a future of a modernity which would be on India's own terms. The hope was to test the relevance of this experiment in education and this experiment in introducing new professions for this country under conditions which were not just unique, but were probably the toughest in terms of a laboratory or a testing ground. And therefore, Jawaja was identified. Now we'll move into a presentation that was put together some years ago, way back actually in 2009, and there's a story to that which I'll tell you later. It was put together by the artisans themselves and a student of NID who helped them to tell their own story. So now we can start that.
Ashokji, just a small request. Could you just talk a little louder?
All right, is this better now?
Yeah, much better.
All right,
you.
sorry. This presentation, and we will just continue with the visuals. I will speak to the visuals. It is concerns our encounter with a community in Rajasthan near Ajmer, and two communities, one of weavers and one of raigars, leather workers. When we went to Jawaja, it then was home to about 80,000 people. It's about 1.5 times that. And just to give you a location of it, this is, we can go through these very quickly. The most important issue here is that the village block of Jawaja, this is the important visual. This is the road to Jawaja in 1975. And there's nothing that you see here in this picture which would tell you that this has become one of the most important classrooms and laboratories for design learning that any institution could ever have asked for. Jawaja was selected because the government of Rajasthan had said that it had no scope for development. It was devastated by drought and environmental decline, uh, serious issues of caste and deprivation, poverty of an unimaginable scale. The communities that we finally began to work with were eating once in 2 days on the average. And they had no access to the village well because of caste prohibition. Suddenly, we as designers and design educators and management students and professors were encountering realities which had there was nothing in our background to prepare us for this. But Ravi had asked the government of Rajasthan one question: are there people there? And he was told, of course there are. So our first task was to try and develop a sense of trust with these communities, who were initially very suspicious of what we were doing, and for good reason. Here you see two 20th, 21st century institutions in Ahmedabad, not too far away, but worlds away from Jawaja in terms of human experience and contact. What on earth could we possibly understand or teach a community when our background was to the world of commerce, industry, and education as had emerged by 1975 after the years of independence? But we asked ourselves, how could we possibly be of any use to these communities, and what was their agenda for change? All this took not just days or weeks, but years to develop a sense of trust and communication where we would begin to understand how they understood progress, what they wanted. And in the search for resources, apart from the fact that there were these wonderful communities and people there, we found also that in this community, there were craft skills, weaving and leatherwork. And in this slide, you see two of the pioneers who established this experiment. Helena Perentuppa from Finland. Can we just go back? I think I just want to point this out because this is important. On the left here, you see Helena Perentuppa, a textile designer who came to NID from Finland after finishing her studies in the USA, and then became one of the pillars of India's design education. And on the right, you see Neelam Iyer, a student of design, who decided to select the leather craft of Jawaja for her final project at the Institute, and then became an iconic figure in not just this project, but in the whole area of design for craft. Next, please, continue now. So we moved into these spaces and began to learn from this community what they had in terms of resources, in terms of knowledge, the kind of products they were now making, and the problems they were facing because these traditional products were now being impacted by mass production and by plastics. So both these communities were in great distress. Not only that, they were under very severe caste restrictions. Now just hold this for 1 minute. They were under very severe caste restrictions. For example, the Raigars were forbidden from flaying animals, which was a service that they had given to village communities in the past. So at one stroke, their caste elders had cut them off from the free raw material that they used to have. And now they had to purchase their raw material, moving to the markets of Ajmer, Ahmedabad, occasionally Jaipur, and each time they stepped out, they were exploited and cheated. So the brief to the designers, and this is where the design process comes in, because design is always an act of service to a client, and it should always follow a brief. The brief, in this case to Neelam Iyer, was, what can you make with local materials no dependence on anything outside the village. What can they make that we might be able to help persuade someone to buy and to pay for? And from that experiment emerged what is now the classic range of Jawaja bags. And these moved over time. Now we're jumping years and years into a whole range of products. Now, just a moment here. All this while, this experiment was being watched by the local power structure, which did not approve of it at all. Caste elders and the money lenders had threatened these two communities that they didn't understand what was going on, but they didn't like it. And to get members of this community to even join with us in this experiment was a huge challenge. And that challenge is described in the book that you see. But as you hear me speak, please understand that we're talking about a process that goes on through several years and is an immense learning curve for these designers, design students, design educators, professors of management, and other disciplines, which began to move in to create a range of products that this power system could know nothing about and would therefore not be able to control, and hopefully provide a space for self-reliant, independent activity by these communities with access to markets which are entirely new. When we went to Jawaja, most of the people that we worked with had very few of them had even visited Ajmer. And now they had to move across the whole country, sometimes accompanied by people from NID and IIM, but most of the time pushed out on their own and with us somewhere in the wings to help if needed. Out of this experiment, over the years, a range of products began to emerge. Some of them have now become design classics. Some of them, after 30, 40 years, are still considered contemporary and are in great demand, not just in India, but overseas. Most of it leather and woolen floor coverings. Now, the question here, if you just hold this for one moment, is that a range of design emerged, which initially, yes, you can continue now, which initially we were accused of imposing Scandinavian designs on a rural community in Jawaja. This was a joke because all of these designs were conceived of by the local artisans. And it was John Bissell of Fab India who told us this is absolutely fantastic. You have been able to touch the design nerve of this community. Here, for example, is a design inspired by the look of wet earth and of flies, which were all over Jawaja then and now. And the artisans wanted the makhis on their daris because they said that is our chap, that's our mark. And these were initially dismissed as Scandinavian. So you can understand the joy and the concern that we had that a community in Jawaja had entered the design space and through this act of co-creation had created such completely contemporary designs. And they continue today, not just as artisans, but as artisan designers and as design entrepreneurs. And this has been the outcome of this partnership of an institution inspired by the Bauhaus, which was set up in 1919 in Germany, which introduced as a program of design education, which has now gone around the world. The Bauhaus was closed by the Hitler in 1919, but it also inspired Gurudev, who visited the Bauhaus soon after it was opened, and who took inspiration from there to start the first experiments in design education, not in Ahmedabad, but in Shantiniketan, way back in 1922. His experiment failed, and we can talk about that later, because that seed of failure is something that we have also carried. But by 2009, when this presentation was made, these artisans were familiar to markets all over the country, that emerged as designers in their own rights and as respected professionals, including the fact that in the process of working in Jawaja, NID was also immersed into what is the second largest source of Indian livelihood, which is handcraft. A huge sector, severely neglected. We can talk about that more in the Q&A. To this day, we don't know how many artisans there are in this country. The official estimate by the government of India is 30 million, 1-3. The unofficial estimate is 250 million. So you can understand that if an industry, which is what this is, doesn't have its basic data, how can investment be attracted there? But what Jawaja has proved beyond any doubt is not only the power of design, but the importance of bringing people together, of collective endeavor, of the strength that comes from working in numbers. And for those of us who are in design to understand that we have to be able to be understood, we have to be able to make sense to communities whose experience is far older than ours, and who, as in Jawaja, have turned out to be not just the recipients of learning, but surely they did learn from us, but they were our teachers. They were our gurus. And they took us in terms of design education to levels that we would never have reached without this encounter with the artisans of Jawaja, not just in craft, but in terms of understanding marketing skills, in understanding what it means to get into these difficult areas of education, and helping us to move into other areas of development, such as drinking water, sanitation, human rights, education, and health. So this strategy that we have raced through in Jawaja has implications well beyond one place. But the question is often asked, how successful is Jawaja? Why are there not 100 other Jawajas? After all, two huge institutions getting involved with a handful of people, what's the big deal? Is this replicable? The phrase which has been thrown at us since the first day we went to Jawaja in 1975-76. Can this be replicated? Can it be scaled up? The question that we have learned is no community, just as no craft, can be replicated. What can happen is that the learning from one experience can be extended to another. And that has happened at Jawaja. The learning from Jawaja has been extended to many, many places, to many institutions, to many fields of work which have nothing to do with craft or rural development. That has happened. And more than that, perhaps, the encounter with Jawaja has led to some of the most important social and development activities in this country. People who encountered Jawaja are now in many places, not just in India, but all over the world, having done things and experienced things and had the courage to move forward because of what they learned from the Artisans Alliance of Jawaja. In this presentation, which can be made available to you to go through at your own leisure, there is an issue that I'd like to share with you. This presentation was made in 2009 for an invitation that was extended to the Artisans Alliance of Jawaja by an NGO in Canada, which had been working with Jawaja for some years and had great respect for them. They were organizing a global conference of artisans, and they wanted the artisans of Jawaja to be the keynote speakers. For that conference, they prepared this presentation, and then they were refused visas. They were refused visas by Canada, although the host for this conference was the mayor of Vancouver and the University of British Columbia. So that experience of rejection at Canada seemed to be a mirror. Excuse me, one minute. Please don't touch that. Don't touch it. Sorry, I have a granddaughter problem. She's preparing for an exam and wants to take away my phone. uh, that experience of rejection was taken in its stride by the artisans of Jawaja. They had celebrated the opportunity that they would be the first to go overseas. They would have this wonderful opportunity. 2009 was when Zoom and Skype were just coming in. And the extraordinary thing was that sitting in the Ravi Matthai auditorium in IIM, we were able to connect over a difficult line by Skype with this conference. And the artisans of Jawaja who had been given half an hour were given 3 hours to make their presentation. And it was, in that sense, a great success. But it did underline the fact that the issues of deprivation, of poverty, and of rejection, and of caste prejudice, and all the problems that were there in 1975, 76, were there in 2009. They are there today in 2024. And in some ways, the problems are even more complex today than they were. But design, Indian design education, and Indian designers, and Indian artisans, and an Indian community have made a demonstration which is possibly the only one of its kind in the world. And it is held with great respect wherever people know about it, wherever people learn about it. But did we fail? Did we succeed? There's no simple answer. Today, when design has become such a sought after profession, with design schools popping up at every corner and design tuition shops opening up at every corner, one begins to wonder whether we succeeded or whether we failed. Because today, no design school in this country would ever undertake a project like Jawaja. Design has gone back into the UGC mold, and there's no tolerance in that mold for an open-ended experiment that continues for 50 years, as has happened in Jawaja. So for someone like me, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. But I do know this, that Indian design through Jawaja and other efforts of a similar kind by other groups, other institutions, other teams, have made a demonstration which is not only relevant to the future of this country, but I think to the future of the planet. The special development goals, of which there are 17, are reflected in everything that you have seen. And there is a lesson here, not just for India, but for the world. However, the future now depends on another generation which is taking this experience forward. And here in 2009 are the artisans of Jawaja saying farewell to their comrades in Vancouver, but they are the legacy. They are linked to Mohenjo-daro as much as to the Taj Mahal, to Gurudev and Tagore, to Nehru's vision, which created the national design, and they are today standard bearers of what Indian design has demonstrated that it is capable of doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashokji. That was indeed a very, very fascinating session that you've just demonstrated how, with the right inputs and the right environment, how the villagers themselves were empowered. I think this is a fantastic story, and I would now open up the floor, and Gauri, maybe you can take over in terms of asking people to share their thoughts, their
Yeah,
observations, and what they learned, and any questions from Ashok ji.
yeah. Sure. Thank you, Sonia. Yeah, as Sonia said, it's indeed like, I would like to just add, like, had you not told us about, how NID is involved in the Jawaja project, we wouldn't be thinking, when you talk about design, we wouldn't be thinking about this project, which has so much of, relevance to the entire project of Jawaja. Though, like, if we studied that in our IRMA days, I'm sure like none of us, others like who are not involved in this would know that design is something which is has contributed to this entire project, and which has, so much relevant in the current day, because especially now a lot of farmer producer organizations are being formed, where farmers are being brought together and to help them in the marketing, not only of the commodities, but also of handicrafts, and all, a lot of artisan based FPOs are also being formed. And I think this is something which the policymakers should think about when they are going about promoting so many farmer producer organizing and trying to help them in marketing their products. And in this experiment, I think would go a long run, for them to understand how it can be made successful. So this is very, very insightful, Ashokji. Thank you a lot. Thank you very much. So I just would like to ask the participants to ask any further questions on this, or your observations about the project, or what would you like to understand more about, the design concept, and how it's so important in development area. Yeah, I haven't seen any in the chat, so I think better you can, Nilima, maybe you can allow them, whoever is going to ask the questions uh, to unmute them.
Um, if you raise your hand, I think you can unmute yourself, but otherwise, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Or just drop a message in the chat if you want to ask a question.
So while Nilima is
Deva is saying, sorry.
asking, yeah, Deva, go ahead. I'll ask mine later.
Deva,
Deva,
you are on.
I'm sorry. Am I audible?
Yes, Deva, come a little closer.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful evening to everybody. Mr. Chatterjee, I had the opportunity to be in IRMA and work with the National Dairy Development Board also for some time. And now I have listened to your experience with Jawaja and things like that. What I feel is, okay, in addition to all the efforts and all the identifications and whatnot, there should be an element of you know what I call as the relevance of the project, the relevance of the this thing to this thing. That doesn't click so easily. You went there and you found out that the weaving as well as the leather products are relevant there and things like that. But many people, when they take up any rural development project, they go and try to push in their ideas, and that is probably a cause of a failure. I mean, if I start a project, I can't go to a group, a society, trying to develop, push my idea. This is the way, this is the project, and this is the design sort of a thing. What is your reaction on that? Sure.
Well, I think you're quite right. One of the challenges we had in the beginning was the late Professor Ravi Matthai, who led this project, told us, we are going to this place not with our agenda, but to listen. And that listening process took us a very, very long time. That was because of not just the social environment, the fear that they had of getting involved with a project which might cost them the support systems they had from the higher castes and the moneylender and so forth, but also for us to understand. We went there as designers. We had no idea whether anything we knew was of any use to them. And the first thing that we did was to get involved with tomato cultivation, because that emerged as what they wanted to do. And we lost some of our students and educators from NID because they said we didn't come to NID to do tomatoes, thank you very much, and they went back to Ahmedabad. But Ravi Matthai said, we are here to listen and we're here to help. And this may take a long time. You don't want to be here, you go off. It was through that experimentation that these local materials and skills came to light. And also through that experimentation that we developed a sense of trust. All of this was an education for every designer in every circumstance, whether they are learning to cope with Tata Industries or whether they're dealing with an artisan community. You listen to the client. You see the world through the client's eyes. And your job is to serve. You're not there as an artist. You're there to serve. And so the agenda for Jawaja, just as the design solutions for Jawaja, emerged from the interaction between artisans, traditional artisans, moving into new areas which were completely untraditional, moving into markets which were new to them. All the time, this experience is being fed back to other students working in other streams. So they too would understand the challenge of what development actually means. And what we learned as a group was that these communities, these men and women and children began to matter to us. Their future began to matter to us. We did not have the opportunity to opt out because we knew that they had taken certain risks. We did not understand the whole issue of risk-taking in the development process. We were thrown into it because for these people that we were working with, it was a matter of life and death. They told us at some stages, don't think we have joined you because you people are so wonderful. We've joined you because we have no little choice. And we may pay for it with our lives for joining you. But all this was an education for us. And all of this had to be fed back into design education and management education. The tragedy today is that the need for this kind of experimentation is huge. But it does not fit into what has now happened with the capture of design education by the University Grants Commission.
Thank you so much, sir.
Prashant has a question. Prashant Shirali, please go ahead. Mute. Nilima, you have to unmute him.
I've done, Gauri. He has to unmute. Prashant, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
No, sorry, your voice is not coming.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, cool. Technology. Ashokji, my question is, as part of the presentation, you mentioned how the particular caste were not given access to the flaying of the dead animals and therefore they lost their raw material. And therefore the design ask changed to working within what was available in the village or with them. Was there any intervention made to change that, and or did that change because the experiment is from 1975? Has that changed in recent years as a progress? Thank you.
They are still not allowed to flay animals. That's a very strict prohibition that has happened with the island community, and there have been a lot of work, documents that have come out on that. They are still not allowed to flay animals. And the flaying is now done by an even lower caste. What happens in the process is that the carcass is dragged to a distant location. In the process, the skin gets scratched. However, over these years, there are changes. Uh, there are now the tanning is done locally. Uh, in the same way, the weavers are able to do things today which they were not able to do before. Let me also add that the weavers and the writers of Jawaja are now respected teachers. They teach on campuses in this country, and they are valued by the students that they teach. So they go out as teachers. However, these the issues that they now face are very different in the sense that today the challenge for them is how to cope with a market which is changing with the speed of light, and how to keep up with a hugely competitive market, both at home and overseas. The present challenge in Jawaja is to diversify their product range, to keep on having new ranges. Because every time you go to an exhibition or a sale, the classics may be what actually move, but people want to see something new. To keep up with this, you have to be able to have designers, not just internally, but externally. Designers can no longer be expected to be work free. Although throughout this period of experimentation in Jawaja, nothing that NID and IIM did was free. The difference was that the price was extracted in a different way. If you teach one person, that person had to promise to teach another. If we taught in one village, that village had to promise to arrange for another village to be taught. Nothing was therefore given free. This was a dictum by Professor Matthai that we are not there for charity. We are there for self-reliance. And that ethic has continued to this day. The problem today is for, this of course will take another session, to what is happening to design education in this country, which has become a huge for-profit industry. And the funding for an effort like Jawaja, and the patience and the tolerance for failure, because we had many failures over these years. We're having many failures right now as we speak. The tolerance to learn from experimentation, which is at the heart of design, is now minimal. So neither the educator, nor the student, nor the institution, nor the parent is willing to tolerate this anymore. And yet, here was an example of design's effectiveness, which is being studied today, because even the Bauhaus and the Bauhaus movement out of Germany, which went around the world, has never been tested under such circumstances. Tested and found successful. And yet India, which is the laboratory for this experiment, hardly cares. So the question is, it's another generation now that has to see the importance of this. And it's not just doing Xerox copies of Jawaja, it's taking this process, this involvement, this ability to understand that poverty and oppression is the design agenda. If we want design to make the kind of difference that it was supposed to make when it first came to India. We haven't had time to share that history, but it is important that history be understood. Because when design came to India, it came with a particular symbol. And that symbol was the lota. And that symbol was selected by the founding spirit of NID, Charles and Ray Eames of Los Angeles, who said that lota was the greatest example of industrial design that they had ever encountered. And they held up the lota as an example of India's profound understanding of design and of design principles. And they said the need for such an institute, as they were recommending to Jawaharlal Nehru at that time, was that this institute and those who study and work there would produce the lotus of tomorrow. And by that, they said, we mean the products and the systems that will serve India with the same service, dignity, and love that the Lota has served India for thousands of years. That was the ethos for bringing design education to India. And that is the ethos which is today almost extinct because of this rush in a for-profit, totally market-oriented approach to design education and design practice, forgetting that 80 to 90% of India is still there. I was just at the opening event of a design school the other day, and I could have died when I heard the students coming into design education for the first time being told that they were lucky to live in a country which had just seen the spectacular example of design through the Ambani wedding. And that is the future of design that they should all aspire to. If there was a pistol nearby, I think I would shot myself. But that's where we are today. So has Jawaja succeeded or has it failed? I don't know. I suppose the future will tell.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashok ji. Nilima, one request. Will the recording be available to the attendees later? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Josna, you want to ask your question or it's answered?
It's partially answered, but I'm still curious that if Jawaja designs have lasted for over
Yeah,
40
please.
years, if over 40 years, then what is this urge for fast fashion and this and this whole discussion on how much waste fast fashion generates, and when I read about Burberry burning their stocks because they don't want anyone to copy, so I wonder where are we? It's been partially answered in what Ashokji just said, but I just wonder about it. It's not really a question, just a
Well, I think
kind
it's
of
very
thought.
important. I think you raised a very important issue. I have been encouraging the Jawaja artisans to see themselves as ambassadors of sustainability because that's what they are. And what they do and what they practice, which is also true of millions of artisans all over the country, relates to the Sustainable Development Goals, of which there are 17. The craft sector addresses 11 of those 17 goals directly. Directly. No other industry in India can make that claim. And yet, when India reports its progress according to the SDGs to the United Nations, the craft sector and the contribution that artisans make is never mentioned. And it is never mentioned because the data is not there. And at this moment, after 13 and 14 years of trying, the Crafts Council of India and the Institute for Human Development are working together on a methodology, a field methodology, that can develop a way of calculating the contribution which artisans make to the Indian economy. It's the second largest source of employment, and yet we do not know what these millions of people are doing. We don't even know how many millions there are. That is the reality of all the talk we do about our ancient culture, etc., etc. Gandhiji brought crafts into the heart of the freedom struggle. Nehru, people like Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay, people like Pupul Jayakar brought crafts into the forefront of activity. We cannot imagine an India without handcraft. And yet that sector is taken for granted, which you cannot do in today's competitive world. So we, after 13 years of struggle, are now without a single rupee from the government of India, are now developing a methodology which I hope the government of India will use. But we are doing it after 13 years of effort. But what is important from your point of view is, today for all industries, sustainability is the key factor. And waste is something which all industries have to watch with great care. The advantage that people have who work with the craft communities is to learn this culture not as an add-on, but as something which is inherent in the way this Indian industry functions. There was never any waste in Jawaja, right from the day we entered there till today. You don't have to talk to them about waste. What you have to talk to them today about is how to conserve water and how to recycle wastewater. How to ensure that every scrap of material that is used has some reuse somewhere. They understand this instinctively. But the importance of an exposure of this kind is that design students and design teachers begin to learn this. And they begin to learn this as Indian knowledge, as an Indian approach. And they can help apply it. This needs more time to show you other examples of this, but certainly that is true. And as a footnote, let me just add that in 1979, the United Nations brought the world to the NID campus in order to understand the experiment in design education. The Indian example of design education was held up as a global model, And a declaration and recommendations came out in 1979 from that campus, articulated by design teachers and design students from all over the world, sitting in one place and looking at the Indian experience. And what they recommended was in anticipation of the Sustainable Development Goals. That is the power of design, the ability to come together, to understand a problem, to prototype the future, to experiment, and to dream in a practical way. And today there are people overseas, unfortunately none in India, who are astonished that in 1979, a bunch of educators inspired by India should have come to these conclusions well before the Human Development Indicators, well before the SDGs. But that's the power of design education. And that is what we are losing in this mad rush for numbers and for profits.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Vivek, you had a question which you've written in chat. Would you like to ask that?
Lakshmi is here and she's been doing some of these Jawaja-like things all her life in an area of social communication. So she's an example of how this ethos moved out of crafts into another area of human rights, of health, and of empowerment.
Maybe while Vivek's audio is coming up.
Yeah, you wanted something? My internet.
Actually, if you would like to share something, what Ashok ji said from a different context when you tried similar things.
Lakshmi is on mute.
I think Vivek has come online now, has he? Or
yeah, finally I'm unmuted. Finally, I'm unmuted. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I had lots of internet problems today, and I just, I don't even, even my video seems to be not working. Yeah, well, I was probably I probably still continue to be one of those designers who've always remained in the development sector. I started my career in development back in 86, 88. And one of my first clients is, in fact, sitting here, Nilima. So Seva Mandir, I was in Seva Mandir for a while. And my second client is also sitting here, Josna. We did a lot of work together, and we've done a lot of work. We continue to do a lot of work together. It's always been difficult to negotiate for spaces for design within, in the NGO sector, if that's what we want to call it. But one chugs along, and one has, I think, put some footprints. So what design education, in what NID prepared us for, then was it was a very open-ended and very open-minded kind of training that we had, and that's the reason why some of us were able to get into development and look at issues and turn things on its head. For example, I'll give you a quick example. One of the early things that I did, which I worked along with AC, all of our students called him AC, so we continue to call him AC. We looked at how non-literate communities understand pictures, and we developed visuals that could easily communicate whatever we wanted to say, whether it was abortion, whether it was menstruation, whether it was any of sexually transmitted diseases, whether it was any of those things. And I think only design education can help you to see things in a different way, which is what at least my experience has been. But again, resources are limited, and very little money is allotted for design in any project. And that's something I've just not been able to negotiate too well over the years. But then I'm at the last leg, if you will, because the younger designers are all on this fast track mode and are very impatient when they work with communities that are not like themselves. I hope I'm communicating this well. There's absolutely a lot of impatience because they want quick results, and they don't have the patience to sit and work along with communities, which is something that our training at NID gave us, and which we religiously sort of followed. So that's why, as a designer, I was able to work with very difficult subjects like communicating about, say, abortion and menstruation to boys back in 1990. It's difficult now, it was difficult then, but we were able to do all these things because we looked for different solutions and always worked along with the community. So, I remember Josna and I, when we developed a training manual together, almost every visual in that book came from the community. So Josna is over here. I think, your Pavdi project was all about that. And there are similar examples like that. So I guess I'll close here because even I can just go on and on.
Well, I think what you just heard from Lakshmi is extremely important. One of the failures of the Indian design movement, and I take responsibility for that, along with others, is that we have not developed a financing system for design service in the social sector. And unless we do that, we are not going to be able to make the kind of difference that we should. What Lakshmi has just said about the new generation is very true. But I also find the new generation extremely sensitive to the issues around us of injustice, of climate change, and of empowerment of those who are at the margins. I find them far more sensitive than my generation ever was. But the issue is that if you're going to work in that area, you need to stay alive. And the funding system for design for development still does not exist. In the organized sector, it is there today, and it seems to be on track. In the social sector, it still does not exist. And that is the stamina which particularly education institutions should be leading. They're the ones who should be building up resources for design, service, and demonstration in these sectors. But they're not. And the UGC does not encourage them to do it.
Yeah, and we have an youngster among us who, I mean, like maybe having a different perspective. This is Vivek Majumdar, who has done his master's in products design from Srishti College, Bangalore. And he's also an evaluation designer at Deloitte. It's something called UI UE designer, which I understand is user interface and user experience designer. So I think his perspective would be more relevant, like, to the current timings. So Vivek, you had a question which you can ask Ashok ji, and also talk about your experience in this design field.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Put on your video also, Vivek, if possible.
Actually, I'm on my mobile. I don't know
Okay.
if that would be possible
That's
or not.
okay. That's okay.
But sir, thank you so much for such interesting insights. So basically, I had one question. As a designer, I wanted to know what metrics or evaluation methods do you recommend for measuring the success of community-based innovation initiatives?
That's a tough one. I think the matrix has to be developed by the community itself. If you go back to the Jawaja example, it was very clear. We were told by the communities that at the end of the day, they would judge the investment they were making in this project by whether they would have a second meal in one day, whether they would have access to the village well. They were not looking at the success of this in terms of just the sales of their products in the market. They were looking for dignity and for hope, and they expected us to deliver that. And this was really rather terrifying for us when we first heard this. But I think in terms of the kind of the indicators of success or the indicators of progress, I think that's what you're mentioning. These have to be specific to each situation. In another example, inspired by Jawaja, in the same state of Rajasthan, we were part of the team that removed Naru rogue, guinea worm from India. Now that's a very different kettle of fish to crafts, but the process was the same. And here the indicators came not from the community, but from the health administration. They said that we will judge the progress of this design intervention if there is a change in behavior in terms of how drinking water is handled, stored, and used. And so the emphasis, as Lakshmi was explaining, was in developing through design intervention, communication aids that could lead to behavior change, and then working with other people who could actually track and measure that change. That include health workers, social scientists, and others. And we removed together, working as a team, and I emphasize this, as a team, working together, we removed a dreadful disease from India. I'd like to know of any design school anywhere in the world who can say that they have been able to do something like that. And that's not a design achievement. It is a design process achievement, which brought teams together on which the designer made extremely effective and important contribution. In fact, the Chief Secretary of Rajasthan, when the project was coming to its conclusion, said that one of the most important aspects of this project was that design students asked questions that other people did not ask, and they saw opportunities which other people did not see. He said that was the contribution your institute made, far beyond the actual communication materials they created, was this ability to be able to analyze a situation intelligently and to bring other people together in terms of this analysis. So I don't know whether I've answered your question, but if it is community work, then always it is the community which has to decide. The community is your client. And just as an industry, you expect your client to tell you whether what you have done in terms of product design, whether it is for an automotive device or whether it is for a table or whether it is for an advertising campaign, the client decides. The client has their measurements. And hopefully you can influence those measurements. But we have to treat communities as clients, as respected clients, and let them set the benchmarks of success. Let them set the benchmarks of success. That was the whole purpose of the NID system of education, which has now been thrown overboard. That the students learned design by serving real rejected it, you failed. You couldn't say that my design is better than my neighbor's and should get me more marks. Sorry. Your client decides whether your design works or it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, it's back to the drawing board.
Thank you so much. It does make sense a lot.
Where are you, Vivek, and what are you now doing?
So I'm currently in Pune. I did my master's from Srishti Institute of Art Design and Technology, Bangalore. So my master's was in product design, and we were also taught in a very similar manner to do experimentation for design. So one of my projects, I'm just sorry, I'm just talking, but one of my projects was also somewhat similar. So going like using plastic wastes to create product out of it. So for that, I went to different waste collection centers to see what kind of different wastes are generated from the community. And from that, I like got to know like a lot of insights, what kind of wastes are generated, and through that, I was able to create like 2 different products for an NGO.
Now,
So
I'd just like to jump in for a minute, Vivek, and say
Mhm.
that for someone like Vivek, who's working on plastic waste, which all of us know is such a colossal problem, how does he find a client who will fund him to actually continue to do this product design work? That's the challenge that I just mentioned earlier, and he represents that. The Srishti School of Design has been an excellent design school. It has also gone through a nightmare dealing with the university system, as I'm sure Vivek knows.
yes,
And instead of helping Srishti to continue to be an experimental institution of the kind that Vivek has just mentioned, the university system has tried to suppress Srishti to become another Me Too technical training college. And that's the challenge. And that's the challenge. And perhaps we as designers also take some responsibility for this, because when this was happening to Srishti and when this has happened to NID and to other design schools, the design profession has kept its mouth shut. It has not said that India can do much better than this, and that we don't need to be told that we are to become world class by mimicking the West, that we were world class. In 1979, the world came to India to learn. Why have we thrown it away? But Vivek has just underlined the challenge that I mentioned. How is this young man, this young designer, who has got experience in the whole colossal problem of plastic waste, who is going to fund him to concentrate on that? Who's going to pay his salary for a year, 2 years, 3 years to continue to work in this area? That's the challenge.
Yeah. Sonia, you had a question in the beginning. You want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to share my recent experience. I had done a field visit to an NGO called Kranti, which is this is the Pardhi community. I think two of the participants today's session, Anil Tulse and I think Sunita Tai, both of them are sitting in this session. Anilji, if you're there, then please show yourself. So here the issue was that these are what you call de-notified communities. They're migrant workers, but they also used to be traditional fisher folk. And now the government has come up with some restrictions on the kind of fishing that they're doing. So when you are in a situation when your traditional skills are no longer relevant or are creating a problem, then how do you actually redesign development for or progress for people like this? So Anilji, there you are. There he is. Anilji is there. You can raise your hand. So Anilji, up. What do you think? What was your takeaway from what Ashok ji has just told us?
Oh, yeah, excellent. I mean, it's inputs. I'm feeling very excited actually to listen for the first time. No, such a I'm introducing design in the social field. So it's a new era actually, new area for me, and I'm thrilled to listen his experience, how Jawaja project work. I'm really happy to listen those things. Thank you, sir, for giving your inputs, your thoughts, and one of the problem actually uh, uh, I just see that the communities which were facing problems, no, they are still there, like one of the participants said. So this is one of the big challenge actually in front of us again here, because since last so many years there are many vulnerable communities in India, the Adivasis, Dalits, and tribal communities, and they are still facing the same problems of the caste system, uh, and then the problems of day-to-day life actually not fulfilling their needs. So someone has to come forward for forward development of the life of these people to design the tools actually what needs to be get done. In fact, this is the task of the uh, the leaders of country, but I don't know how they are doing. They must be doing good, but the beneficiaries are still there at the uh, uh, there actually. I mean, in a large number.
Well, I think when you talk about the fishing community, that's a good example because we have such a long coastline and there are millions of people in that community. So what should happen? Surely what should happen is that the issues of that fishing community should move into an institution which can reach out to them and be of some help, understand what they have. I am at the moment working with a colleague in Pakistan who is facing exactly the same issue. And what she is trying to do in Sindh is to work with the fishing community to understand their skills. She has found ways in which their skills can be turned to weaving, for example, and but more important, to bring back boat building in ways which are relevant today, and above all, to showcase them as a resource of enormous knowledge, which Pakistan should take seriously. And she's facing the same problem that you just described. But we have so many of these communities, and what I have, my feeling is that what Jawaja indicated, if anything, was the power of design service when it has got an umbrella of two national institutions coming together to provide a protective space for analysis, for understanding, and for service, and above all, to stay with the community. Not to say it's a project, but to say it's a process. And not to fix a timeline, to say we'll come in, we'll work with you for 6 weeks or 6 months, and then we'll go back. No, you can't make that kind of change. And that's where this partnership between NGOs, educational institutions, organizations of science and technology, all the knowledge institutions, it's these networks that are needed. And the advantage for NID and IIM was they could bring these networks together. They could get on the phone and speak to somebody at CLRI in Chennai, for example, to help the Raigars, or the Weaver Service Centers to help the others. That's the role of education institutions. And that is what the Srishti School was also doing and trying to do, and hopefully will continue to do. But my hope now, when I look at Srishti, Vivek, my hope now is that your institution can be a Trojan horse. The UGC has captured you. Now from inside, can you make a revolution? And show that, okay, even within the UGC, we can make a change.
Yeah. Vivek. So Vivek, are you there?
Yes. There was one more question, Gauri, and that can be the last question, maybe.
No, that's about the rural university. Is it Prashant's thing?
I think Namita asked a question. Namita, are you there?
Her question is, are there any institutions apart from universities and colleges who do fund and look forward to a bottom-up approach?
I'm sure there are. But I think that's not an easy question to answer. Of course there are. There are many. And Nilima herself has been a powerful leader in that way. But we need to come together and we need to make a difference at the policy level. And I think the problem that we've all faced is the preoccupation of policymakers whose understanding of progress is hooked on to statistics and to infrastructure rather than to human well-being. So long as that paradigm of development persists, that progress is about infrastructure and about statistics and not human well-being, then we have a fight on our hands and we have to keep fighting. After all, we are Gandhi's children and he anticipated all this. Gurudev's experiments in design education failed, and that was more than 100 years ago, because the fine artists of Vishwabharati decided that they were the Brahmins, and all this artisan business was dabbling in something which is beneath their dignity. So there have been challenges for hundreds of years, and there will be challenges for the next 100 years as well. But we've got to be able to find the stamina and the teams and the strength in numbers to be able to deal with it. None of these issues that we've discussed today are in any of the vision documents that the government of India has brought out on design. It's all about design for the organized sector, which is absolutely valid. But the organized sector is only part of the Indian reality.
Yeah, Nilima, I think there are no more questions.
Yeah, I think no more questions. So maybe just say thank you to everyone today, and I wanted to first of all actually thank Ashokji. The day he had heard about seniors in Seva, he sent a beautiful mail to all of us. And then he said, one of your I don't know, senior most sevak, but he said, but he used the word sevak, which was the most beautiful word that anyone has used to describe us. So, and his generosity with his time, with everything, Ashokji, extremely, extremely grateful to you. And I also want to say that in the story that you shared today, one, I'm very glad that somebody like Vivek and others who have maybe not disclosed their names and introductions, we don't know, but I'm very glad that in some ways, the legacy of work done at Tilonia, or the kind of work, let's say, even that Lakshmi did, which was a good 10 years at least after your work in Tilonia. My fear is that much of that legacy will get lost unless people like you and Lakshmi and others continue to talk about it. Because I know already from some of my younger colleagues, they had never heard about Tilonia and all the work that happened there. So I'm very glad that somebody like Vivek is here. Young people, if that legacy can be carried forward, it is most important that we do not lose that legacy. And the other thing I wanted to underline for me, Ashokji, the most important thing that was said today when Vivek asked you the question about what is the metric that you used. It's a very today kind of question. All the work, any work that you want to do today, the first question that people will ask you, what is the metric? In how much time will you achieve it? And your answer was so, you said the metric that the community shared was that if they can eat 2 meals a day instead of 1 meal in 2 days. That was one metric. And the second metric was if they can have access to the common well. And like you've written in your book, maybe in all these years you have succeeded on the first metric, but the second metric, maybe still there is distance to go. But I kept thinking that that's not the kind of metric today that anyone will allow you to even articulate that, the metric is that people will begin to eat twice a day or they'll have access to the village water, to the village well. But this fight that you said is inspiring, that let's not forget we are Gandhi's children. And if that's the fight, then that's the fight. So thank you very much, Ashokji. Thank you very much, Lakshmi, for joining. I think you really added to this conversation. Thank you, Vivek. And thank you every single one that joined today. We are extremely, extremely grateful to each one of you. And as we say bye, I'm going to request Deepak to play the 5-minute video on the Lota. Ashokji mentioned that film while talking. It's a 5-minute film, beautiful film. Maybe the audio is a little here and there, but that's the film that was made just when NID was being formed. So Lakshmi knows about it. Many people here will know about it. But those of you who have 5 more minutes, please do stay and watch the film. And then after the film, there will be no more bye again, and we will just close it.
Let me just
Yes,
mention
Ashok.
that if anyone would like the link to either the film or the PDF, which is available in both Hindi and in English, of the Jawaja book, please let me know. It will be published by NID. The book has a history, and it was written during the COVID period as a tribute to some of the people who were the pioneers at Jawaja who passed away. Incidentally, my preoccupation was with Jawaja, not with Tilonia. But Tilonia is another story, which you mentioned, Tilonia. That's another story which needs to be understood. So there are many. But if anyone is interested, you're most welcome, and I'll be happy to share the PDF, and in due course, hopefully, the book itself.
Yeah, my apologies. I said the word Tilonia instead of Jawaja.
No, that's absolutely valid, because Tilonia itself is also part of the same struggle.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So thank you all once again, and over to the movie time.
Of all the objects we have seen and admired during our visit to India, the lota, that simple vessel of everyday use, stands out as perhaps the greatest, the most beautiful. The village women have a process which, with the use of tamarind and ash, each day turns this brass into gold. But how would one go about designing a lota? First, one would have to shut out all preconceived ideas on the subject and then begin to consider factor after factor. The optimum amount of liquid to be fetched, carried and poured and stored in a prescribed set of circumstances. The size and strength and gender of the hands, if hands, that would manipulate it. The way it is to be transported, head, hip, hand, basket or cart. The balance, the center of gravity. When empty, when full, its balance when rotated for pouring. The fluid dynamics of the problem, not only when pouring, but when filling and cleaning, and under the complicated motions of head carrying, slow and fast. Its sculpture, as it fits the palm of the hand. The curve of the hip. Its sculpture, as complement to the rhythmic motion of walking or a static pose at the well. The relation of opening to volume in terms of storage uses and objects other than liquid. The size of the opening and inner contour in terms of cleaning. The texture, inside and out, in terms of cleaning and feeling. Heat transfer. Can it be grasped if the liquid is hot? How pleasant does it feel? Eyes closed. Eyes open. How pleasant does it sound when it strikes another vessel, is set down on ground or stone, empty or full, or being poured into? What is the possible material? What is its cost in terms of working? What is its cost in terms of ultimate service? What kind of an investment does the material provide as product, as salvage? How will the material affect the contents? How will it look as the sun reflects off its surface? How does it feel to possess it, to sell it, to give it? Of course, no one man could have possibly designed the lota. The number of combinations of factors to be considered gets to be astronomical. No one man designed the lota, but many men over many generations. Many individuals represented in their own way through something they may have added or may have removed, or through some quality of which they were particularly aware. The hope for and the reason for such an institute as we describe is that it will hasten the production of the lotas of our time. By this we mean a hope that an attitude be generated that will appraise and solve the problems of our coming times with the same tremendous service, dignity, and love that the Lotus served its time.